So, Derfel and Peter, welcome to Exeter, and I'm really excited about what's going to happen now.
So am I. Okay, Peter's going to do the technology stuff. Actually Peter and I were invited independently of each other to come and speak at this event. I think Malcolm invited Peter and Liz invited me. And then we both realised we were coming to speak at the same thing. So we thought, well, why don't we do something jointly? And we thought, well, we could come along and we could talk about this is the Quality Assurance Agency, this is what we do, and so on, and bore you all to death with that sort of information. So we thought, well, let's do something different. And I talked to Liz, we thought, well, let's have a debate. Let's try and force a room full of people who are enthusiastic about technology, the use of technology, to question themselves and question those sorts of assumptions. So we came up with this statement: effective teaching and learning is not possible without extensive use of technology. And Peter is going to argue in favour of that statement, and I'm going to argue against. And hopefully that will stimulate some ideas, challenge some of your assumptions, and give you an opportunity to challenge us as well. But the first thing we wanted to do before we get started on that is to get first reactions from you, to get an impression of what you think when you see that statement. So I'd like you, first thing to do, there's no grey area in this, black or white. You have to decide, do you agree or do you disagree with that statement? No sort of, well, I'm a bit, well, sort of yes or sort of no, one or the other. So those of you who agree with that statement, would you come over to this side of the room, please? And just stand at the edge. And those of you who disagree, would you move over to this side of the room, please? No fudging. You're not allowed to sit still and say, I can't decide. All the way, all the way.
It's a long way, battle of the handbag.
That's really interesting. I actually expected it to be the other way around. I think I've got a much easier case to make than I thought I would have. Thank you very much. We'll test this again at the end, see if I've managed to put any of you off, and see if Peter has managed to persuade, or either of us have managed to persuade you to go to the other side of the room. Thank you. Do you want to take your seats, and then we'll get started. We've both got 10 minutes each, and we'll keep each other to time. So Peter goes first.
Are you going up to his hair?
Okay, we're talking here about your learning and your learning today. So welcome to the University of WizBiz, where technology drives your total learning experience. We're logged on, plugged in, wired up and in the cloud for your full support and personal learning development. We'll take you on a journey from your Facebook induction pages to your alumni avatar reunion. Effective learning has to have technology. Effective learning is chronologically and technologically synchronized. It's aligned. We appreciate the multitasking online lifestyle that you pursue, sharing images and videos, rapid information retrieval, daily social networking. This, familiar to you from your school and your social life, will be central to your learning experience at this university. We won't disappoint your expectations of us for high-performance connectivity and integrated social networking. This will all be part of your higher education learning journey. As a native of the digital age, you'll be able to integrate communication systems that we offer seamlessly with your own personal online world. Your own laptop, your iPad, your smartphone will be providing the university contacts, calendars, mailing, to overlay all on your own systems merging and aligning with the world that you know. You need flexible learning. You're busy people. You have complex lives. Modern life is many-sided, many-faceted. Learning is one part of it, and you need to understand, and we need to understand, that learning has to be handled efficiently. So we've worked to make it more efficient for you. Students shouldn't have to come in to take a book out of the library. They shouldn't need to attend a one-hour tutorial or come in to discuss a project with another student. You can do all this from home. You can do all this from your workplace. We'll fit in with your own personal, family or work patterns. You'll have greater choice about when and where you learn. Technology will help the students to manage the pace, the time and the place of their learning. Just one example. Every lecture that's given in our university is videoed, indexed and put online within 24 hours. You can choose the bit of that lecture you want to see. You can choose the bit that is important to you. You can catch up. So you don't need to get up in the morning. Just plug in online. Effective learning is personal. Because we believe that technology supports active learning, you will spend a lot of time reflecting, collaborating, and working with others, but in your own way and in your own choice. We'll match learning to your personal needs and your own progress. We'll assess you regularly to check where you are and how you're doing. And you'll record your personal learning journey on your online portfolio. You'll put together your own choice of learning packages, using reflective learning blogs and sharing ideas with others on wikis. So it'll be personal, but it'll also be collaborative. There'll be lots of opportunities for collaborative work, using our advanced communication software to conduct shared projects, share reflective videos, take flip cams with you to take videos of what's being done and show it to others, to share and discuss real-life practice and performance, so that when you're working to learn something new, you can gradually see your own progress, reflect on it, think about it, show it to others. Online discussions and webinars will give all the students the opportunity to contribute and share, and also to evaluate their studies. You'll be able to participate in multi-user virtual environments for life rehearsal interaction, working with others in role plays, problem-solving case studies. All our courses will include what we call serious games and other virtual activities which will intensify, amplify and enhance the real-life teaching that you'll be experiencing. Think Farmville goes to college. Assessment will be tracked, analysed, and your feedback will be rapid, informative and helpful. You'll have a richer communication with your tutors. With technology, you can hear more often and more productively from the staff you're working with. We'll have group messaging, regular email contact, online course notice boards, audio feedback from your tutor on assessment, and podcasts on the key learning points from the tutor that you know and have met. Effective learning, above all, is active. Technology will be used to design and support learning scenarios which are involving, exciting, and motivating for you. We're thinking about problem-based case studies, real-life scenarios where you have to make decisions, active research assignments where you're the people producing the knowledge, so that individually and together you'll be working on complex designs or development tasks where you produce something that you can own, you can record, you can retain and share with others and show in terms of your own achievement. We think you can collaborate in a very meaningful way. We're talking about a more democratic form of education in our institution. We're talking about new relationships between tutor and student. You bring knowledge of the way in which technology works, which they're only still catching up with. You can share the way in which work can be presented, in which work can be done, in which you can collaborate. So we want you to contribute to the curriculum. We want you to help design it. We want you to help review it and evaluate it. Work together with us to capitalize on the shared assets that we have for learning between the tutors as facilitators and the students as co-producers. Students will shape the learning environment here. You know that you'll be needing skills for your work, for your employability, that will involve new technology. We'll give you the basis for that.
You have 1 minute, Peter.
Actually, it's 2, according to my digital measure.
I'm relying on good old-fashioned wine Derfel.
You will have 21st century life skills, information retrieval, knowledge management, communication, participation, networking, sharing, teamwork, data management. These are the key employability skills that we'll be focusing on. So to summarize, technology is a part of better learning today, now, because it allows for more flexible patterns of engagement between individual students and their courses. It can become strongly supportive of more active learner-centered community or group-based learning. You will find technology-based learning as part of your entitlement at our university. We've enshrined it in our student charter. You should opt for the 3 Ps of progressive pedagogy. Personalization. Participation. And productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Peter said at the beginning of his talk he was going to take you on a journey from Facebook to Avatar alumni networks. I intend to take you on a journey to a pit of despair, because I'm going to argue that technology has no place in learning and teaching. Effective learning and teaching is perfectly possible without technology, and not only is it possible, but it is better off without it. You heard this morning both Liz and Michelle talked about network failures and how basically the world had fallen down around our ears yesterday because someone had flicked the wrong switch. A switch had gone the wrong way. You had your chance, Michelle. And that had ruined everything for everyone. You can ask a question later, perhaps. And Liz mentioned we had technology problems this morning. Looking around the room, you all have your laptops. You're totally dependent on this, whereas actually you can learn perfectly well without this sort of thing. I'm relying not on this presentation technology, but on trusty pen and paper for making my arguments. My notes are here, and I hope that I'll be able to persuade you of my perspective. I'm approaching this from an angle of how do students learn and how is teaching conducted. And I think general sort of consensus, there are 2 approaches to this. There is independent learning, where students explore issues, do their independent research, and learning is guided by experienced and active teachers in an academic environment. And then there is cooperative learning, where students may learn together, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, sharing their knowledge, testing and challenging each other. And those are going to be a theme running through what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk particularly about some of the key tools and gimmicks that are included when we're talking about technology in higher education. First of all, the big behemoth, the internet. The most wonderful technology ever created. The world at your fingertips, that's the way it's described. Endless, bottomless pit of information and knowledge that you can access. It's a fantastic resource. I use it myself. It's fantastically rich. You can access it anytime, anywhere, and get any sort of information and opinions and perspectives from all sorts of people. but it is limitless. It's full of information, but ultimately, when you're learning through the internet, you are guided by two things: Google and by crankpot polemicists on Wikipedia and in the blogosphere. How reliable are those? How good is that as an education experience for students? Is that really what we mean when we're recruiting students to come to university to learn and be guided by professionals that we are then setting them loose to be guided by these, as I say, cranks commercial outfits that we're not really sure whether they're reliable or not? So I'll return to the statement. Effective teaching. Where is the effective teaching in that sort of approach that the internet is providing? Students are left lolloping and careering around boundless pits of information with no guidance and no support to steer their learning. And that's what education and teaching and learning should really be about. We're here to support the learning, not to observe it. And that's a key difference. But I'm sure you're all thinking, well, it's not just about the internet. There are other sorts of tools that have been created and designed. And I'm thinking of things such as blogs, podcasts, reflective logs, even simpler things like online submission, and even trusty old email that's available for students. That's all fine, and I think that's useful. But I'll return to the statement again. Is education really is that really necessary for effective teaching and learning? I would argue not. And I would also argue that independent learning is not only possible without technology, but it is actively undermined by it. So I think, what about the cooperative approach? Students learning together. Aha, you probably say. Peter made the case. Much easier to cooperate and work together using technology. Something such as wiki logs, whatever you call them. You technology people. Surely that's the best thing since sliced bread. You can collaborate, share ideas, comment, contribute, change other people's opinions, add perspectives. Brilliant for collaborative work. But in truth, the results are patchy. Students don't like it. They're uncertain about how to use it. They find it time-consuming. And the assumption with that is that all students are altruistic. In truth, they're not. Students are interested in getting a good education. Students are interested in getting a good academic qualification. They're not interested in spending their time on Wiki contributing to other people's thoughts and ideas. And that's where the problem lies. It's this assumption of altruism for students, and that doesn't exist. So there are problems with that, and there are problems getting them to engage with it. So what do? We employ more staff, not only to create this stuff, but to support and provide training for students in order to use it. And you have to ask the question, is that the best way of using the resource? Wouldn't it be better to support and train effective teachers to deal with the students in the way they want to teach, rather than deal with gimmicks? Finally, coming back to this issue of the internet, other things that are talked about in terms of cooperative behaviour, Twitter, Facebook, those sorts of social networking sites. Internet behaviour is quite selfish. People use these sorts of websites because they're seeking pleasure and entertainment. If you look at something like Twitter, Britney Spears has as many followers as half the population of Europe. That's what Twitter is used for. That's fine by me, but really, is it the dawn of a new era in higher education? I think not. And I probably don't need to tell you about the backlash towards using Facebook for teaching and learning. Students don't like it. They don't want you to use it. It's their own personal space. They use it to communicate with each other and share their own life stories and their experiences. The final point I wanted to make was this conference is about change agents. It's about students being active learners, active participants in their education. Where really is the active participation when you are only using technology? If, as the statement says, teaching and learning is only possible when technology is extensively used. It's a passive experience. Students are sat at their PCs talking to themselves, not to anybody else. Those technologies that are available to communicate with each other, they don't use and they don't like. So I would argue that using technology actually undermines what we are trying to achieve and what we're talking about at this conference. Thank you very much. Within time? I won't do
how many more minutes you've got.
I'll go on for as long as you like. Now it's your chance to question and challenge us, moving swiftly on.
Move it down to the motion.
I don't know how to do that.
Oh, of course you don't. Sorry. A mere touch of the button.
So come on, some of you went to one side of the room or the other. Have you changed your minds? Have you been persuaded? Yeah.
I haven't really been persuaded, but I thought that your argument was nice if the statement didn't say what it does say. This statement's very polar, whereas what you offered as your conclusion was mixed. You said it can be an active participant in the learning for students, and I think that it possibly can, but you weren't arguing for that statement, I don't think.
The statement is very black and white. And I did try to twist it a little. In a very legitimate way. I think the only way we can actually look at effective teaching and learning is within our current context. And our current context is one where this technology is available and can be used for better or for worse. So we can't ignore it. So in my very first statement, I said we have to think about it being for you and being today. And that's important. It's important not generally, clearly. This is a very general statement that extended over the whole of history. It would certainly be inaccurate.
For you today, you could make that point, Peter, but here today, gone tomorrow is equally strong point. Who remembers MySpace? Who remembers Bebo? They were the big things at one stage. Everybody had to be engaged with those. Must everybody get on MySpace and do something? Anybody logged in the last few days?
I think it's probably quite interesting to look at what you mean by effective teaching and learning. And I've been involved quite recently in working in Africa and India, where those technologies don't exist. And if you talk to the people there who are desperate for technology for the latest research in higher education, and they're not finding it, or they're finding it 6 months coming down the line through a print-based medium, they are finding themselves to be out of the loop with the rest of the world, and they're not able to access what's going on in the rest of the world. So I think that, yes, teaching and learning is possible, but effective teaching and learning is absolutely essential. Having technology is absolutely essential.
I think my problem and why I was on this side of the room was the words effective and extensive. If they'd not been there, I would have happily said teaching and learning is not possible without use of technology. And my reason for saying that is that all our social practices are inhabited by technology. And I've been talking a lot to students who have to take radical measures to distance themselves from technology if they make a personal choice to learn with a pen and paper. Institutions would have to take very radical measures to exclude technology from the spaces in which people learn. So I think it's more about how we take that as a given.
Something you do. Done.
Yeah, but are you going to police all the people who come into the room and take their mobile phone and laptop off them? Are you going to deny, where's the mobile signal in this room? That's not been switched off because someone flicked the wrong switch over in ILS here. So you can't take the technology away from the social practices. You just can't do it. What you have to do is make sure that the learning that we engage in and the teaching we engage with are informed by that context, and that learners have agency to deal with it positively rather than being overwhelmed or...
Yeah.
It sounds like a wise point, but I feel like I was just...
There were good points in both of your presentations, weren't there? And I think a lot of people would have preferred to be standing in the middle, really, because that was a bit black and white, your statement. Definitely.
I ought perhaps to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we also have to kind of query the word technology, because neither of you really defined that. And in fact, you were saying that you were going to use good old pen and paper. And of course, technology is a continuum. And as you were saying, there have been these things that have come and gone. So technological tools are part of the fabric of our life. But if we're talking about new technologies, then we have to be really clear what we mean by those, I think. And the other point I was just going to say is, Peter, you portraying this vision of the future, really, with your hypothetical university. But I wonder, whether your vision of the future should also include how the funding crisis will impact on this utopian view that you presented
Can I
of
just, sorry,
how
Professor
easily
Coffey, can you
technology
hear
will
this
facilitate.
discussion all right from the back?
So you know, on the one hand, there was talk about how we're looking at it in the here and now, but your presentation was actually a very utopian view.
Well, I actually thought that it was mildly dystopian, at least, and I wasn't doing myself any favours by casting it that way. But I was trying to give a sense of all the different things that you know, if you bring everything that's going on together across universities, it could look something like that. And of course, in a way, it could also look a bit anonymous and alienating in the end, as Derfel highlighted. But yes, no, my vision was completely resource-free. I allowed myself that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the statement you start with is actually a little unfair on Peter because, you know, clearly you can teach and learn without technology. I mean, people have been learning teaching without digital technology. People have been learning teaching for many, many years before digital technology was around effectively. So I think it's rather unfair to say it's not possible. If the question, and actually what you both addressed was it better? Was it enhanced by? And I think if that had been the question, been over there in a shot, but making it black and white, saying it's not possible without, how can you argue it's not possible without?
Yeah, I agree. For the
It's not fair. I think it was an unfair statement for Peter.
I don't disagree with that at all. The intention was to have something that you could at least polarise around. Perhaps we didn't. Someone else.
I think so I don't want to pick on Peter because I know you were kind of both being devil's advocate to something I suspect, but elements of your argument were premised on the kind of specious fallacy, which is quite prevalent, that students actually know what they're doing with this technology. A lot of the evidence suggests actually they don't. So I think you'd be very wary when we talk about incorporating technology into, you know, student, lifestyles. They know how to use it in a context, which is largely a social context, but actually when you break out, that's a lot of evidence suggests that really in terms of information literacy and searching skills, they don't really know what they're doing beyond, you know, the danger of going straight to Google and, you know, tapping in and taking what they get up as authoritative. So just an observation of that, really.
Very good one. I think that's absolutely right. I think I was parodying this sort of self-conscious anxiety that people in universities seem to have about students coming in and being much more digitally capable than they are. But they are actually different technologies used in different ways. And in fact, the majority of staff in universities are extremely sophisticated in the use of very particular pieces of software and technology for their purposes. So yes, it is actually learning new things, not bringing what you know and simply imposing it. Although maybe there is something in the idea that there's a value in the sharing of different presentational methods. You certainly hear about students doing projects and putting them on presentational sites which they want to use, and then saying, would you like to go there and look at it? And the staff actually find that they've never been there before, and it's actually quite interesting. That sort of thing happens, doesn't it?
You've sort of neatly brought us on to the conclusion, the crescendo I wanted to reach, and with this was actually the link, how this links to the change agents agenda. I think the point you make is absolutely right, that you can have all these whizzy ideas, new technologies that are available, and they seem terrific, but they're very daunting to the majority of students. There'll be a pool of enthusiasts. And I think that's where the change agents element comes into it. So what leadership role is there for students? To be identifying these opportunities, to be developing the opportunities, and leading the experience, sharing the experience with others, to incorporate and bring other people into it. So maybe we can have a bit of a discussion about that too. But there's someone up at the back had her hand up. You're looking at your phone. Malcolm had his hand up.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to pick up on, you were talking very much about what the student was going to get, and linking to what Dan just mentioned then, it kind of struck me about the staff as well, as, you know, we have a big job in making sure the staff are confident in delivering and using those technologies for their teaching and learning, and that kind of, I think, needs to be addressed as well, on how we're going to make sure the staff are appropriately trained and developed to use these technologies.
I think it's fair to say that my pitch is actually from the point of view of an ambitious institution. It didn't really have that much interest in the students or the staff. but it's certainly not the staff. I mean, it was appealing to students in a rather negative sense of student engagement. It was trying to seduce the students by offering them things which sounded fantastically exciting and glitzy and whizzy, but actually might not be very fulfilling in the totality. You could say, perhaps simply, this was over-egged technology, at least as the way we see it at the moment. Although certainly there are universities in some countries that are moving in that direction. It's not a completely unrealistic scenario.
Whatever you may think, Derfel, about the use of social networking tools to aid learning and teaching, yesterday Usman Ali reminded us that in the research that the National Union of Students did, one of their findings was that 81% of respondents, i.e. students, used social networking sites weekly as part of their studies. Now, I don't suppose the institution required them to do that. This was free will, this was their choice. So, I mean, there are students here. Do they use social networking freely? Is it part of their everyday practice, and why do they do that?
I'm a student, hi.
A
real life one. I would say that university essentially, I mean, in one way, is finding a discipline for yourself, and that's what independent learning is. Involving social networking, which is kind of a hobby in your work, can break that discipline down, because you can be tempted to go off on another track and to completely not do what the assignment was, and I've often found that if we've been including that kind of thing. And yeah, so I think it's if you're going to create a social network for it, create something like LinkedIn rather than Facebook, something that is made for it, and that people know the parameters in which to use that thing. Because if you just give a random platform for people to do whatever they want with, they're going to do whatever they want with it, and that's not always going to be what the learning outcomes of the module or the outcomes of a university degree are.
Yeah, I think we also perhaps might need to break down that 81% figure a bit more kind of forensically, because what a lot of students do, in my experience, I'm not sure if there's any evidence to back this out, but we have to distinguish between e-learning and teaching, or technology enhanced learning, whatever you want to call it, and e-administration. A lot of people use, and a lot of institutions use social networks to set a lecture cancelled. Don't think your exams are happening a week on Tuesday. That's a legitimate use, and I don't think most students would actually object to that at all. You know, that's not incursion into their social space, I would think. But that's not teaching and learning. So I'm not sure when you say 81%, we might need to sort of be a bit more forensic about how that actually breaks down, whether it's either as a conduit for administration, whether it's actually about teaching and learning. I'm not sure.
I was going to say
This is quite fascinating actually, because I really do want to sit on the fence, because listening to what this student just said, my son and one of his friends are both at University of Exeter, and they were having a conversation on Facebook yesterday, and my son's friend said, do you know what, I can't believe I've got to the end of my 3 years of my degree without going into the library. My son responded in the way of saying, really? How did you do that? The reply was, well, I didn't feel it was needed for me. I had everything I needed. My son responded, I didn't. And I think that is essentially what the student was saying here, is that it is about the individual, about how they respond to their learning needs. And for some it might be right to use extensive use of technology. For others, actually you still need that interaction. So it was a really very timely and an interesting discussion that I was following just as a concerned mother and librarian.
Yeah, Derfel, your pen and paper university. I was just wondering how you envisage part-time students who work 37 hours a week, or distance learning students engaging with that university.
The way they used to 15 years ago, before the internet and social networking was created. Things would be posted to them. They'd sit up until 3 o'clock in the morning to watch someone in flares with sideburns at university. Worked perfectly well. It's a vision for the future.
Hi, as a librarian, I'd just like to say that it's perfectly possible to use the library without going into the library by using technology. I know.
It was a conversation.
Yeah. I'd like to make that point. Yeah, absolutely.
Many libraries.
Exactly. Just very briefly, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of students about how they use social media with and against their studies, and I've kind of found 3 different strategies. I won't tell you what they are, but I can if people are interested. But I was very interested in what you were saying, and what you were saying about it's up to the individual. But I think that comes back to agency. Some students feel very empowered to develop their own strategies around technology, or even around refusing technology for certain aspects of what they do. And that's about whether they feel that they have the agency to be empowered by the technology or not. And that seems to me to be exactly what we're talking about.
Just an aside, I've been working with some RAF trainers recently, which has been interesting. And they have no access to the internet on their base. But they've started using off the base with people's own stuff because they're quite old like me, and all their students are probably 19 to 23. And so they've started using Edmodo, which is very much like Facebook. And they're absolutely converted to this because the students love it because it's like Facebook. And the lecturers love it because they can deliver their very regimented courses through it. So it's probably a blend of the 2 things.
With students from University of Wolverhampton, it was just to pick up on the Facebook point. I know it obviously depends on the student individually and whether they're going to be disciplined or not to restrict themselves, but I don't think it's really possible to tell students don't use Facebook during your university time and don't use Facebook for these purposes. And I don't want to say, if you can't beat them, join them, but I think as we're going to talk about later, there are ways to exploit people's social networking habits to actually enhance their learning in university, even if it's not teaching and learning as
I think that there's another really interesting debate in there, which I know a lot of universities and colleges deal with, which is how do you balance the desire to empower students to pursue their own activities via whatever network that might exist, with the risk that's associated for the institution of cranks, polemicists and so on, using it to get negative messages out and managing that sort of message. And it's a real tension within institutions between different departments and so on. I don't think anybody's quite come to the right sort of conclusion on it yet. But, sorry, there were other... Peter, did you...
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we need to also be a bit careful about how we're conceiving of learning. Somebody behind me said something about people talking on Facebook, but that's not teaching and learning. And I think what's behind that is a kind of idea that learning is a cognitive process. There's an awful lot to learning which is about supporting each other, about having engagement in what you're doing. And I think that, I've been doing some research where I've got some very interesting data from students who were supporting each other on instant messaging. And it is about encouraging each other, it's about marking time, about how you're getting through something together. And so there are all sorts of ways, I think, in which the technology can be supportive of a much broader conception of learning. So I think that's an important aspect of this.
I think that was a serious point that was buried in my rhetoric. I do think that is a very, very important enhancement area. Sharing, discussing together, collaborating is a tremendously important part of learning. And the new technologies allow communication applications, communication methods, which are really huge improvements on what we used to have, because we can actually, exchange information across a number of different people without actually meeting up. And that is really, I think, a big change, and one that's very valuable in terms of supporting initiatives in learning. And we know very well that students helping each other to learn is actually just as powerful as being with your lecturer and tutor in learning. That those 2 things get taken together can make a huge difference.
Were there any other comments? You had your hand up. So
yeah, I was just going to mention something about the employability of the students attending in the 2 different universities. It might be well and good having a paper university, but if they're suddenly then introduced into the world, business world, using...
My graduates went to bankers.
Right, okay. That's the other thing.
They'll soon all be sacked.
It's a wider range of programs being taught nowadays. It's okay with some subjects, basing your teaching in a lecture theatre on pen and paper, but if they then want to go into the private sector, they're going to need to know these technologies.
I think, if I can just come back to that, I tried to frame what I was saying between two places. The student coming out of their own social experience and the way technology is used there, and moving into the experience of employment. And it seems to me that there's the acclimatization to advanced technological skills, which is a part of learning in higher education now. It'll be the particular skills for your particular subject that are important. And then they're not the generic skills in technology that students come into university with, but they will become tuned and adapted to your particular area of professional expertise. And that's what you take out into the community. And that is very important. That's very, very important for employability and also for longer term life skills. And that's one of the things that universities should be giving in terms of the education within a technological environment, in a technological context.
And if I could drop the pretense for a second, I think the point that you made and the point that Helen made earlier on, umbilically linked, if you like, teaching and learning in universities must reflect the way students are behaving and the behaviour is towards using these sorts of technologies. And the point that you made at the back is you don't impose styles of using it, but you need to adapt to the ways people are using it. You need to adapt your teaching and learning styles. And there's also that leads to this is the world that you're moving into as a graduate.
Do you want a final vote?
Well, I've adapted the statement. Are we happy with this as a consensus, given the discussion? It's getting... we could debate it for hours, like QAA, commas and so on, everywhere. Yes? Good.
We haven't talked about quality assurance at all.
Oh yes, we can do that if you like.
But of course, quality assurance is the great umbrella under which
Your time is
all technology enhancement will sit.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right, can we thank Peter
Thank you very
and
much
Derfel,
for being here.